to the first episode of Cleaning Code with Doc Norton. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the JDepend library. JDepend is a static analysis tool that allows us to understand the coupling between classes in a code base. Does measurement of afferent and efferent coupling and gives something of a quality score for your application. Find a fork of the source on my GitHub page, github.com/dev, and you can find the original over at Clarkware. So let's get right into it. All right, now to do a little bit of level setting here. JDepend's a code base I'm not particularly familiar with. I downloaded it a couple days ago. I haven't done a whole lot of work with it. This series is not intended to be a set of structured lessons on how to do specific refactorings or patterns or anything else. This is really just me exploring a code base and kind of sharing with folks what happens when I do that. It may or may not be of value to you, but just wanted to put that out there and kind of level set where we are with this and set some expectations. So let's take a look here at the code base. I've got JDepend open in IntelliJ, and all I've really done is just get it up and running. I've made sure that the tests pass, and I've got the basics. So let's take a look at this. So JDepend.java is kind of the main application, I'm guessing, and as I kind of just peruse through it, the first thing that I noticed that is not a primitive really is our file manager. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at what file manager is. It says it's responsible for extracting Java class files from a collection of registered directories. Okay, so file manager, it looks like probably what we would do is we would pass it a directory or list of directories, and then it's going to create a list of Java class files from those specific directories. So let's take a look at that quick. Not much here. File manager, we have our collection of directories, which is an array list, and then we have except inner class equals true. This is probably because JDepend can be run to look at internal dependencies or just the dependencies between classes, regardless of inner classes. Okay, so except inner class, right, that all makes sense. All right, add directory string name. So here, what does this thing do? We're going to pass it as a name of a directory, I'm guessing. We're going to get a handle to that directory. We're going to check to see if it is in fact a directory or if except jar file, and we pass it the handle. If it meets this criteria, then we're going to add it to our list of directories. Otherwise, we're going to throw an exception invalid directory or jar file. Right, okay, except jar file. All right, so right off the bat, it looks like file manager doesn't actually just pull from a collection of registered directories. It also pulls from jar file. All right, so let's look at the jar file. Except jar file. It checks to see if it's a jar file, right? Or it's a zip, or it's a war file. Okay, so it's actually checking to see if this is a acceptable container file. Okay, and let's look at these. Okay, they're all together. Is jar, is war, is zip. Looks like they check to see if the file has that specific extension, if it is a file, and if it has that particular extension. Okay. Okay, interesting. So yeah, I think I want to start here. What are my tests around this? That was accept. Okay, there's no tests around except jar file. pardon me, there are maybe some tests. Oh, that's JDepend. There are maybe some tests around add directory. Yeah, okay. So add directory is being tested to see if what? Test jar, test zip. But there's no asserts in these, so test invalid directory. Test non-existent directory. And test build directory. Yeah, these are confusing to me. So this says it's a test, but there's no assertion in any of these tests. Are these called from anywhere in here? No. Okay, so those are, all right, one step at a time. Sorry. So I don't know what these are actually doing that's of any value to us. So I want to actually get some tests around accept jar file. I'm going to add them right here. Test method, test accept jar file. Sounds great. Okay, so FileManager, we're going to call accept jar file. We have to pass it a file. Let's see what that does. So let's type things correctly. Okay, that failed. Why did it fail? Why did that fail? Probably because this is not a real file. Okay, so I know that there is a test data directory and we have a test.jar. So let's try that. Get test data directory. So that's an actual file that exists. So the new file would actually, yeah, okay. Okay, now it passed. All right, because we actually gave it a bogus file. It didn't like it. That makes sense to me. 4. Okay. So it accepts a jar file. What else do we have in that directory? Let's make this easier ourselves. accepts a zip file. All right. So we again expect let's run this. Okay, what we haven't done so far is we haven't seen one of these fail. So this should pass. Let's do that next. What's in that directory? Bin file. Example class1.bin. Okay, so accept jar file accepts does not accept bin file, right? Assert false. What was it called again? Example class1.bin. Okay, so we've got some tests around this class now, so do I want to do anything with it? Well, what I really want to do with this, I want to rename it. I don't like the name of it, but these tests aren't going to help us with that at all. Let's do that. This actually is valid container. Right? So now what we're saying is if it's a directory and is a valid container, then add it. Everything still passes. Of course, now these tests say test accept jar file when actually this is now is valid container. How many instances? 3. It's those 3. Okay, so far this seems pretty like trivial. Not really done anything here, other than we've made this a little more expressive. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and keep the original signature. Interesting. So add directory has some tests, right? So I don't want it to say invalid directory or jar file because that doesn't make any sense to me. So let's look. Okay, add directory had these three weird tests, which I don't know what they do. And then look at this. Oh, wait a minute here. Okay, and then we have these three tests. So it turns out, look at this. This is okay, I guess. So we get the build directory and we check and we see that there's 44 elements in there. By the way, here's what I did with this. The original application was basically running tests against its own build. I didn't think that was a very good idea because every time we extend a class or even extract class or any number of things around refactorings, it's going to break all of these tests because they're all brittle because they are written to expect that there are exactly 44 classes or whatever. So what I did was, this is my actual build directory. This is a copy of a build directory at some point in history, and I use that for our validations, etc. So this is static, and the actual build can change as often as we need it to change. So anyway, that's what I ended up doing to make the test a little less brittle. I did that before we actually got into this. Okay, so anyway, this test seems like it's okay, but look at these two tests. They're test non-existent directory. I pass it a junk directory off of build dir, which doesn't exist, right? There's no junk directory there. And then it basically says, hey, it would fail because of a non-existent directory, and it should have raised an IO exception. Okay, so we expect this to actually kick on IO and exceptions. That's the right catch. When the exception is caught, then we just basically assert true. So all we're actually testing is that some IO exception was raised. We're not testing that it's the specific exception we actually expected. And this says test non-existent directory. Okay, this one says test invalid directory. So we get the test dir, which is here. We get the packages sub dir, which is JDepend framework. And then we get example test.java, which is, oh, I see. Okay, so I think the difference here is that this one is non-existent. Directory doesn't exist at all. This one is not actually a directory. Okay, so these are two different tests, but they look extremely similar to me. So let's look at add directory again. Right, so if it is a directory container, oh, we don't verify this error message. So actually, add directory makes no distinction between a non-existent directory and an invalid directory. It doesn't tell us anything about that. I'm not going to add that behavior. What I want to do here is I want to make these tests a little bit better, and then I want to use the tests to change FileManager such that it no longer says invalid directory or jar file. It would say invalid directory or container file maybe. Okay. So where do we want to start here? If I'm looking at this, add directory, get build dir junk. Okay, I don't really care about that. But this one has a file, this one doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out into a variable and call it file. And I'm going to Okay. Check and make sure that everything still runs. Of course it does, but now these two are a little bit more similar. I currently don't like the fact that it's called file when in fact it is a file name or file location, but let's not worry about that for a second. Okay, what's next? So now we have both of these say should raise IO exception. So let's grab that. And let's call that error reason, whatever. And I'm going to move that up, do the same thing down here. Okay. I'm going to change this. Make sure they still run. They should. These are simple, really trivial refactorings, but I'm just trying to get this thing prepared. So now this is the error reason, let's say. So I'm not sure moving these out of the try is necessary. But we're going to do it anyway. Okay, these are now roughly the same test. Right? So error expected is the same between both of them. Error reason is different. Oh, interesting. Okay. So I'm not sure. Let's do this. I know this is silly, but no. Sorry. I don't remember all of the key sequences. Refactor. Part of this is the difference between Mac and PC. Inline. Oh, Alt Command N. All right. So these seemed unnecessary. Let's get rid of them. Okay. So that's what's different between these two tests. This is what's exactly the same between these two tests. So let's just do this. Method. Replace all occurrences. It's not telling me what they are, but yeah. Okay. All right, so I don't like this here in between these two things, so let's move it down. It's private, we'll move it later. Okay, now we can see that these are basically the same. And let's run it again. everything's good. Okay, now this assertion is bogus as far as I'm concerned. Let's get rid of some of this crap while we're sitting here. All right, this assertion's bogus. Like it's, yeah, I don't even want to talk about it. Assert true, true. It's not a thing. Okay, so what do we actually want to assert? What should have happened is it should have thrown an exception, right? And so let's make sure. I'm going to make this fail on purpose. Get message. All right, so let's assert that what comes back is the message that we actually expected. This is going to fail because I don't know what the error message is. It's something like invalid jar file, blah, blah, blah. But we'll grab it. Okay, invalid directory or jar file. And then we have a build.junk. And then, of course, we have another one here into test JDepend, blah, blah, blah. So it's, yep. So let's grab this whole thing just for a second. Okay, so now one of these is going to pass and the other one's still going to fail. Yep. And why is that? Because it says build junk, but we actually expected that. Well, it turns out that what is this? This is, in fact, our file. Now they both pass. Okay, we don't like file here. We didn't like it before. Shift function F6. Only the code occurrences. File name. Okay. Error reason, which is what came in. Jar file, file name. Okay, now we have one test, which is basically doing the same things, or one assert rather. And I don't want this to say jar file. I want this to say container file because it is jar, war, or bin. We could say invalid directory or jar / war / bin file, but I think container file is good enough. Of course, now when we run it, these fail. But that's because we defined new behavior. Right, container jar. So let's go back over here. Implement the new behavior. Pretty simple. Okay. So I think that's probably enough for today, for this first filling round. Come back in episode 2. We will continue to do refactorings in JDepend.